Imagine Rome in the 1st century BCE. This wasn't the imperial Rome of absolute Caesars, many people know, but a republic in turmoil. It was a vibrant republic, yes, but also deeply divided, where power and ambition could be as dangerous as any external enemy. In this melting pot of glory and political intrigue, a unique figure emerged, Marcus Licinius. Crassus wasn't a born general like Julius Caesar, nor a charismatic orator like Pompey. His greatest weapon was money. Crassus was, without a doubt, the richest man in Rome, perhaps in the entire Mediterranean world of his time. He built his fortune in various and often controversial ways, exploiting silver mines, buying cheap properties, after fires which some claimed he himself orchestrated, and reselling them at exorbitant prices, and even by having a private army of slave firefighters who only acted upon payment. This money wasn't just for luxury. It was the foundation of his political power and influence. Alongside Julius Caesar and Pompey, Crassus formed the first triumvirate, an informal yet powerful alliance that effectively governed the Roman Republic. Caesar had military genius and popular support. Pompey was an acclaimed general and war hero. And Crassus had the financial resources that made everything move. He used his vast wealth to buy support, finance political campaigns, and even equip legions. However, behind the facade of power and influence, a growing dissatisfaction simmered within Crassus. He had money and political power, but he lacked the kind of military glory that Caesar and Pompey brought. They had conquered provinces, celebrated spectacular triumphs, and etched their names in history as great commanders. Crassus, despite defeating Spartacus in the slave revolt, hadn't achieved the same level of military prestige. He yearned for a grand triumph that would seal his legacy, something that would elevate him to the level of his equals in the triumph. His chance, he believed, lay in the East. The Roman Republic had a powerful and historically challenging enemy, the Parthian Empire. The Parthians, based in ancient Persia, modern-day Iran, were masters of mounted warfare. Their horse archers were legendary, capable of firing arrows while galloping away in full retreat. The dreaded Parthian shot. Their cataphracts, heavily armored cavalrymen, were nearly invulnerable. Conquering the Parthians would be an unprecedented military feat, an accomplishment that would echo through the halls of Rome for centuries and guarantee Crassus the glory he so desperately sought. Crassus's decision to invade, however, was controversial from the start. He forced the approval of his military command, ignoring senatorial protests and warnings of unfavorable omens. His blind ambition led him to disregard Roman military experience in the East and to gravely underestimate the Parthian enemy. He sought an easy victory, convinced that Roman might, combined with his own resources, would be enough to crush any resistance. In 54 BCE, Crassus departed from Rome with 7 legions, approximately 40,000 men, including cavalry and auxiliaries. It was a formidable army, but one lacking experience in desert combat and against an enemy so adapted to that terrain. Crassus had the numbers, but the Parthians had the terrain, the tactics, and perhaps most importantly, the element of surprise. He marched through Mesopotamia, toward the heart of Parthian territory, confident in his numerical superiority and the weight of his reputation. Little did he know he was leading his legions and himself to one of the greatest military disasters in Roman history, an event that would not only remove him from the political scene, but also cast a long shadow over the Republic's final years. Crassus's journey with his legions through Mesopotamia was marked by questionable decisions and a profound underestimation of an enemy he barely understood. Instead of following the advice of his more experienced generals, who suggested a safer route or resting the troops, Crassus chose a direct and dangerous path through open desert plains, ideal terrain for Parthian cavalry. The decisive encounter happened in May of 53 BCE, near the city of Carrhae. The Parthian commander Surena was a tactical genius, despite leading a much smaller army than the Romans. While Crassus commanded about 40,000 men, Surena had around 10,000, but these were elite warriors, horse archers, and the formidable cataphracts. The battle began deceptively. The Parthians, with their drums and shouts, tried to intimidate the Romans. Crassus, confident in his legion's discipline, ordered the formation of a large infantry square, with cavalry on the flanks. This was a solid defensive formation against frontal assaults, but it would prove fatal on the open plains. The main Parthian weapon was the horse archer. They encircled the Roman formation, unleashing an incessant rain of arrows. These arrows, fired from composite bows, with greater range and piercing power than Roman bows, were capable of penetrating legionaries' armor. The Romans attempted to form the famous turtle formation testudo, where soldiers covered themselves with their shields from above and on the sides, creating a mobile fortress. However, on flat terrain and against an enemy that didn't need to get close to attack, the testudo became a trap. It protected against frontal impact but exposed the flanks and backs to the hail of arrows coming from all directions. The heat was excruciating, thirst unbearable, and Roman morale began to crumble under the continuous bombardment. The Parthian arrows were so numerous that, according to accounts, The Romans could barely move without being hit. When the Romans tried to counterattack or advance, the horse archers simply retreated, firing as they withdrew. The Parthians shot in its essence, and then returned to continue the assault. When the Romans were exhausted and demoralized, Surenna unleashed his cavalry. These knights were the heavy cavalry of antiquity. Men and horses covered in metallic scale armor, wielding long lances called kuntas, capable of piercing multiple layers of enemies. They attacked the weakened Roman lines, opening breaches and causing even greater terror. The Roman infantry, accustomed to close-quarters combat, was defenseless against the Parthian mobility and firepower. Crassus's son, Publius, led a cavalry and infantry charge to try and break the encirclement, but he was surrounded and massacred. His head was impaled on a spear and displayed to the Romans, a devastating blow to Crassus and his troops. Morale. The battle lasted an entire day. By the end, the carnage was unimaginable. An estimated 20,000 Roman legionaries were killed and 10,000 were captured. Only about 5,000 managed to escape to Syria. Crassus, desperate, tried to negotiate a truce, but it was a trap. He was killed amidst the confusion, and his head was cut off and sent to the Parthian king. In a gesture of scorn for his legendary wealth, the Parthians reportedly poured molten gold into his mouth. The Battle of Carrhae was an unprecedented catastrophe for Rome, a defeat that shook the Republic to its core. Not only was an entire army annihilated and its eagles lost, the ultimate insult for a legion, but Crassus's death dissolved the first triumph, paving the way for the civil war between Julius Caesar and Pompey, which would plunge Rome into years of conflict. Yet, the fate of the 10,000 prisoners, those who survived the inferno of Carrhae and were led east, would remain a mystery for centuries, fueling one of history's most fascinating legends. The disaster at Carrhae wasn't just a military defeat, it was a trauma for Rome. The legionary eagles, sacred symbols of Roman honor and power, were lost to the Parthian enemy. And, even more intriguingly, thousands of around 10,000 men, had been taken prisoner. What happened to these soldiers? Where were they taken? For most of them, Roman history simply falls silent. They vanished into the vast and unknown East. Fragmented Parthian historical records, often written long after the events, indicate these prisoners were moved east to serve the Parthian Empire. Some accounts suggest they were used in engineering projects, others that they were assimilated into Parthian society. But the most intriguing clue comes from a completely unexpected source: ancient China. Hundreds of years after the Battle of Carrhae, Chinese historians of the Han Dynasty, which ruled China from 206 BCE to 220 CE, began to record peculiar encounters. In their documents, specifically the Book of Later Han, there are descriptions of a battle fought in 36 BCE, led by Chinese General Gan Ying, against a group of bandits and mercenaries on the empire's western frontier. The striking detail is the mention of warriors who fought in an unusual way. They formed a fish-scale formation or turtle-like formation with their shields. This description directly recalls the Roma testudo formation, where soldiers covered themselves with shields, forming an impenetrable shell against arrows and projectiles. Beyond the combat tactic, other details were noted. The city where this battle took place, called Jit, was described with a defensive wall fortified with sharpened wooden stakes of fortification. Technique uncommon in China but well known in the Roman world, used to create a quick barrier in military camps. Chinese historians also noted that some of these foreign warriors had physical characteristics unusual for the region, such as prominent noses and light-colored eyes, traits more common among Mediterranean peoples. It was the sinologist, Chinese culture specialist in Oxford University, Professor Homer H. Dubs, who in the mid-20th century proposed a bold theory. These warriors described in Chinese documents could indeed be the descendants of Crassus's lost legions. His theory suggests that the Parthians, after capturing the Romans, moved them to their eastern frontiers to serve as border guards against the nomadic tribes of Central Asia. Over time, some of these Romans or their descendants might have been captured or recruited by local leaders, eventually reaching the Chinese frontier. The idea is fascinating. After the Battle of Carrhae, the 10,000 prisoners were largely forgotten by Rome. But they wouldn't have simply disappeared. Perhaps the Parthians sent them to the farthest reaches of their empire, in the east, a dangerous region with fierce tribes. These soldiers, or their children, would have settled there, maintaining some of their military traditions, including the testudo formation. They would have intermingled with the local population, but their features and combat techniques would still be recognizable. The city of Liqian, located in Gansu province in western China, became the epicenter of this theory. Local legend, passed down through generations, spoke of people with green eyes and large noses, who claimed to be descendants of foreign invaders. Interestingly, in 1990, a group of Australian and Chinese scientists conducted DNA tests on some Liqian residents who possessed these Western physical characteristics. The results showed a greater presence of Euro-Caucasian genes compared to other local Chinese populations. Although a direct link to the Romans couldn't be definitively proven, this theory, intriguing as it is, isn't universally accepted. Many historians and archaeologists consider it speculative, arguing that the evidence is circumstantial and that the turtle formation description might be a misinterpretation of Asian battle tactic. However, the simple fact that a Roman legion disappeared and, centuries later, reports of warriors with Western features and Roman tactics emerged in Chinese documents is a coincidence that can't be entirely dismissed. The mystery of Liqian and the lost legionaries continues to fuel the imagination, showing how history sometimes folds into unexpected paths, connecting worlds that seemed impossible to touch. The theory that the descendants of Crassus's legionaries reached China and settled in Liqian is, undeniably, one of the most fascinating mysteries in ancient history. It ignites the imagination, connecting points that seemed unreachable between the West and the Far East in an era without airplanes or the internet. However, like any great legend, it faces the scrutiny of scientific and archaeological investigation. The evidence supporting the Roman connection in Liqian is, for the most part, circumstantial. The Chinese description of the fish scale or a turtle formation is the central pillar. While remarkably similar to the Roman test, critics argue that defensive formations with shields were not exclusive to Rome and could have been developed independently in other Asian military cultures. Fortification with wooden stakes was also a widespread siege tactic, not uniquely Roman. The supposed Western physical characteristics of prominent noses and light-colored eyes are also a point of debate. Although DNA tests have indicated some Euro-Caucasian ancestry, it's important to note that the Silk Road routes existed long before Crassus's time and persisted for centuries afterward. Traders, nomads, and people of diverse ethnic origins always traveled between Central Asia and China. The presence of Western genes in Liqian can be explained by centuries of population intermingling, not necessarily by a single wave of lost Roman leaders. The difficulty lies in tracing the specific lineage back to the 1st century BCE and directly to the Romans, given the vast span of time and genetic mixing. Despite the lack of definitive proof, the fascination with the lost legion persists, and for good reason. Crassus's story is a brutal reminder of military arrogance and the consequences of underestimating an enemy. The disaster at Carrhae was unjust to defeat, but a painful lesson in tactical adaptability and the importance of terrain recognition. The Parthians, with their light and heavy cavalry, demonstrated a mastery of plain warfare that the Romans, accustomed to a denser, more disciplined combat style, simply couldn't match in that setting. The fate of the 10,000 prisoners remains an open wound in Roman memory. The legion's honor was intrinsically tied to its eagles. The loss of these standards was a profound humiliation that would resonate for generations. The idea that some of these men may have maintained their identity and combat skills so far from home, perhaps even confronting another great empire like China, adds a layer of tragic heroism and human resilience to the story. The legend of Liqian, whether based on concrete facts or an intriguing coincidence, serves as a powerful symbol. It reminds us that human history is far more interconnected than we imagine, and that the threads linking distant cultures are complex and often invisible to modern eyes. It forces us to question the geographical and cultural boundaries we consider absolute today, and to imagine an ancient world where movement and exchange were far greater than we suppose. The mystery of Crassus's lost legion, therefore, isn't just about the search for a group of Roman soldiers. It's about human adaptability, the persistence of culture in the face of adversity, and the intrigue inherent in the lost links of history. It's a narrative that continues to challenge us to look beyond the borders of maps and textbooks, and to embrace the idea that the ancient world held secrets even vaster and more surprising than we can comprehend. The story of Crassus's lost legion and its possible fate in China is one of those enigmas that make us rethink everything we know about the ancient world. But what about you? Had you ever heard about this fascinating theory? What was the most surprising part of this historical journey for you? Leave your comment and tell us what intrigued you the most. And if you have any historical or mythological legends or events you'd like us to explore in the next video, don't hesitate to share your suggestion below. Your curiosity drives our research,